Hello. I thought I'd talk about the Orville season 3. I'm a big fan of this show. I think it's kind of Star Trek, or rather, it's what Star Trek used to be, rather than a bunch of people crying in corridors, affirming each other. Obviously, it's always taken more of a slightly more comedic view, especially in the first season. In the second season, it calmed down on that a little bit, and basically, Seth MacFarlane got his wish because it was kind of a sneaky way of making a Star Trek show. There's still humour there always is, but it's more the kind of humour that you have in an office, which I quite appreciate. You know, there's a sense that it's just people working together, having a laugh with each other. It gets away from the rather more austere versions that you have in Star Trek, and I quite like that. I don't need kind of laugh out loud belly laughs, and to be honest with you, a lot of the humour in the first series was a bit of a miss to me. So this is quite a nice balance. Anyway, getting on to the first episode, which is called Electric Sheep. And the story really focuses around Isaac. After the Kaelon War, Isaac remained within the Union, after Kelly and Mercer requested it. Now, he's finding that the crew are a little bit are hostile towards him, clearly because of his involvement in the war, despite the fact that he's actually the person who saved them. This is where you get introduced to Ensign Charlie Burke. Now, she's a new member of the crew, and she's introduced when Isaac walks into the mess hall, and she's sat there with a group of others. Isaac walks over, asks if he can sit. They say yes, and then they all walk away. Then Charlie comes back, and she explains that she was on one of the ships that was destroyed, and the only reason she survived was because one of her friends basically sacrificed themselves so she could get away. And it's pretty clear that she doesn't just dislike Isaac, she loathes him. Anyway, Isaac goes back to his lab and discovers the word murderer emblazoned on the wall in spray paint. Tala comes down with Mercer and Kelly, and they have to investigate who sprayed it. Within this, there's a story of a new fighter that arrives, the Pterodon fighter, which Gordon flies in. And there's a scene where he's testing its manoeuvrability, whilst Charlie, who we're told is able to interpret 4 dimensions, is flying drones for him to fight. It's kind of a stupid scene because they're basically flying around the dockyard with live fire exercise. It turns out that Dr. Claire Finn's son, Marcus, obviously they were very close to Isaac, is the one who painted murderer on the wall. When Claire takes Isaac to speak to Marcus, Marcus basically tells him he wishes he was dead. And this really is where the story begins, or rather the theme of the story begins, because Isaac goes back to his lab and basically commits suicide. He finds a way to completely shut himself down. It's a very strange moment because they do a quite good job of anthropomorphizing Isaac and making you feel like some of his decisions are actually human, whereas obviously they're all just based on logic. This is kind of echoed in a speech that Mercer does at his funeral, when he says about the crew that much of what they perceive about Isaac's character is actually projection from them. It's quite a meta moment. The story continues. Just before they're attacked by the Kaelon, Lamar discovers that there is a redundancy within Isaac. They don't know whether he didn't know it was there. They don't know whether he just didn't think they'd find it. There's kind of an inference that it's almost like an opportunity for him to change his mind. Lamar extracts it, but it's a very delicate piece of equipment, and it may degrade if there's any interference of any kind, which obviously is a bad time for the Kaelon to attack. They manage to escape the Kaelon by faking the destruction of the ship in a very stormy planet. It turns out that Charlie is the only one who can actually help Isaac come back from the dead, as it were. And she refuses to do it. Even though Mercer kind of almost orders her to do it, she still refuses. And it's only when Marcus goes and talks to her, basically pleads with her, that she agrees to help. Her and Lamar, with the computer, manage to put Isaac back together again and bring him back to life. And Burke basically says, I didn't do it for you. There's a scene with Claire, the doctor, And she's discussing with Isaac, asking why he committed suicide, and he explains it's because of the function of the crew was suffering because of him being there. She manages to talk him round, basically saying, I'm the person responsible for the health and well-being of the crew, and believe me if I say that it's going to be worse if you're not here. If you ever have that question again, ask me. She approaches it with logic because it's the only thing she can actually get him to understand. He accepts that, and then you end with a scene of Isaac working in a lab. Marcus kind of comes to the door. Presumably he's planning to apologise or he's planning to speak, but he sees Isaac working and then just kind of has a gentle smile on his face and walks away. So I really enjoyed this episode. It wasn't without its flaws. There was the visuals were amazing because obviously they got a lot of money. There was a little element of we've got the budget and we're going to spend it, which kind of led to unnecessary scenes, and overall it could have been a bit tighter. Scene with the new ship was actually just a bit dull. It definitely just seemed like, oh, look what we can do with our CGI. It's fine if people enjoy that, but I find that bit a bit boring and a bit overlong, really. I guess it was there to explain Charlie's skill and the fourth dimension awareness that she has, which would then come into play later. But I'd much rather that scene had been cut and the length of time taken and the complexity of bringing Isaac back had been expanded, because it was literally like, oh, we're going to do it, oh, he's back. There was very, very quick, and I wish they'd extended that bit a bit to give it a bit more depth. I thought it was very clever the way they addressed the idea of suicide through, technically speaking, someone who doesn't experience emotion. But as I say, you anthropomorphise Isaac, and he's like a receptacle that you project your emotions onto. The logical argument he makes is an argument that goes through people's brains. People would be better without me. It's kind of a common thought if you're going to commit suicide. You don't think about the people around you, you think people would be better off without me. It's basically a moment of temporary insanity. So there's obviously a parallel there between what is wholly logic to Isaac, but is a really wholly illogical argument in someone's brain when they're not well, when they've reached that point. The fact that he committed suicide after everything that happened to him, it was Marcus telling him he wishes he was dead, was the thing that made him actually decide to commit suicide, again tends to lean into the idea that Isaac has some form of emotional connections, which was also lent into at the end of the Kaelon invasion, where he saves Marcus's brother, or he won't kill him, and decides to fight against his own people. And again, this is it. The Finn family is the family he's become the closest to, and for one of these children to shout at him, in theory, in the narrative of the story, should have absolutely no impact at all, and yet his immediate reaction is to kill himself. And I just think that's quite well done. Obviously, there are echoes of Data. There's the line that he says, I experience certain sensory input patterns. My mental pathways become accustomed to them. The inputs eventually are anticipated and even missed when absent. And that's the same feeling you kind of get with Isaac, although he kind of blankly denies it all the time. Equally interesting was the redundancy. I guess it could almost be interpreted as a cry for help. There's kind of I don't know if it's a joke or whatever, but it's about the man who's falling, who jumps off a roof but changes his mind halfway down. It kind of echoed that a little bit, that, their opinion is he either didn't know or he thinks humans are too stupid. But then it could be the third option, which was almost that changing his mind, because he's efficient. He knows what he's doing. He knows how to shut himself down completely, yet he fails to shut himself down completely. But yeah, no, I really enjoyed this episode. It asked lots of questions. You can all tell it's good writing when they talk about very difficult subjects in such a way that is a bit indirect. I mean, addressing the idea of suicide from the position of a emotionless robot that completely functions on logic. It was, I just found it quite interesting. I quite enjoyed this episode, I say, a little over flabby at times, but no, a really good start for me. So I'll leave you with that, and I'll get on to episode 2 at some point. Until then, peace out. A quick reminder that my comic book, Marked, is available now through my website, as well as commissions for bespoke caricatures and prints. Thank you very much.